Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
While it's difficult to drill down on exactly how many practices are owned by partnerships in the U.S. as opposed to solo practitioners, a couple of statistics indicate that this number may be higher than ever before, with the potential to increase going forward. First statistic is from the ADA Health Policy Institute, and it gives a breakdown between 1999 and 2019 specifically. And I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage, but it gives you a graph. But the key takeaway is back in 1999, 2 in 3 dentists were in solo practice. In 2019, that number has dropped to half, 1 out of 2. The second statistic has to do with practice ownership. And I've covered this on the podcast before, but specifically, practice ownership amongst younger doctors has dropped drastically. And the comparative used in this, again, I'll put the link on the episode webpage, was from the year 2005 to the year 2021. So to give you an idea, back in 2005, doctors under 30 in the United States, 25.4% of doctors under 30 owned their own practice. That number in 2021 was 9.5%. So if you had 100 doctors under 30 in 2005, almost 30 of them had their own practice. Now that is less than 10. All right. And then you go into that 30 to 34 range and you get back in 2005, 55% owned their own practice. That number is now 34.2%. The numbers don't start to approach 2005 levels until you hit the 45 and older range of doctors. That's where the percentage of doctors in that age bracket that own a practice is not that different. So between the less doctors in solo practice than you had back in, 20 years ago, and less doctor ownership in the younger doctors, which means they end up being associates, some of whom will want to be partners, the potential for partnerships seems to be increasing. And the reason I can't give you an exact metric, by the way, on, how many doctors are in partnerships in the United States is because the number's hard to zero in on. The ADA stats usually track partnerships as group practices, which a group practice can mean 6 doctors in one office, 2 doctors in one office, or a straight up DSO. So there's no exact science applied to this, the factor of partnerships. It hasn't been broken down that extensively. And you probably know at least one person who's in a partnership. You may be in a partnership yourself, and maybe you've been considering it. Or if you have an associate, especially since younger doctors are less apt to own a practice, especially doctors under the age of 35, there's always the chance that that associate that you're hiring or that is working for you now may be looking for a partnership at some point or planning to go off on their own. And partnerships, while they're not for everyone, can be extremely beneficial in the right setting and when properly structured. You have more than one person with skin in the game. There's a potential continuity benefits to the practice. There's someone else with which to share the burden, which can be helpful, especially if you have a partner. Let's say you and your partner individually have unique and needful skill sets. And being that this will inevitably end up on some of our listeners' radars at some point, or maybe on the radar of someone that they know, it's probably worthwhile to have at least some idea or framework as to what works and what does not work when it comes to business partnerships. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host, and I've seen plenty of partnerships or ex-partnerships here at MGE over the years. I also have subjective reality on the subject in that I'm personally involved in several business partnerships currently as well as in the past, and it's from this subjective experience that I'm sharing a lot of the information contained in this episode. But keep in mind, I'm not an attorney, so make sure that you have proper legal advice. If you want to compare it to anything, I'm more the end user. I'm the restaurant patron who appreciates good food and maybe knows how to cook a little bit. I can tell you which food is good or bad, but your attorney is the master chef that should sign off on any actions you're going to take. So take what I'm saying here for what it's worth. In any event, if you're looking at a partnership, specifically in a dental practice, it can obviously take many forms. I'm going to focus on the most common scenario. two people. You're in practice and you're bringing in somebody who's going to be a partner, or you're going into practice with a partner. I'm not going to get into how to structure a 10 doc practice partnership or something like this, right? So the first place I would start, if partnership is something that you're seriously considering, is I would really examine that in depth for myself. Do I really want a partner? Do I really need a partner? And why? Because you're essentially starting a business marriage. If you're married, I'm not saying you thought about it before you got married, but you realized you were taking a large step. So if you are getting that partner, first thing is, do you really want one, and why? And what's the why behind it? Is it for business succession purposes? Is it somebody that you can eventually turn your practice over to? Do you find that you're just doing a lot and you want someone else to come in and share the load and help you build the practice, right? So you really want to get a good handle on the why and make sure it's really worthwhile. Some people think it would just be cool to get a partner, but they don't realize that the headache that's going to come from that in the long term, because their head wasn't really on straight when they decided to do it. Okay. Like they hadn't really thought the thing through, and then they regret it afterwards. And then breaking up the partnership becomes a real pain. So if you really examine it and you decide, yeah, I really want a partner, then it's a matter of, okay, so you've made this decision. You're bringing somebody in. What type of partner are you bringing in? And again, I told you I'm going to talk about the most common scenario. You're bringing in one person. So there's a couple different ways that might come up. One, it might be an associate that's working for you, or that you're hiring, or that you have hired, who would like to have partnership someday. There's a few extra steps I would do on that one. We'll talk about that here as we go through the episode. Or you might have an old colleague of yours, or a friend from dental school, or somebody you used to work with, or just a friend that you want to partner up with. And there's a couple things I would look at in this regard. First off, just because you have a friend you work with that you'd like to go into partnership with, realize business and friendship are two completely separate things. And you probably know this. It's not something I'm going to, bang on too hard. But if you're bringing in a partner, that person is supposed to really bring something to the table. That's the most important thing. What are they bringing to the table? So you've got this person you used to work with, maybe when you were younger, and they were a friend of yours. You went to dental school with them. You were in a corporate practice. You work together, and they're a very skilled doctor. They work very expediently. They do a good job, and it's somebody you think you could work with. And you work together, and it went fine. Well, you have some experiential track with this person. Well, there's a good chance that's going to work out. Now, if it's been 10 years since you've seen them, things change. People change over time. That might be a problem. If someone comes along and says they just want to buy into your practice and be a partner, personally, I probably wouldn't do that unless I was giving up control of my business and I was in financial distress. If I don't know the person and now I'm going to be in business with them, that would make me a bit nervous. Because as I mentioned, this is a business marriage. Even if it's for a second or third location and not your main office, it's a business marriage. And obviously it's like a marriage. If you've been together for 60 days and you have no kids and no assets, splitting that up's a heck of a lot harder than if you got a bunch of kids and you've been married for 20 years. Okay. So you want to really consider this carefully before you take the plunge to make sure it's going to work out. And to that end, I have 11 points I want to cover in this episode. And these are points I've accumulated sort of over the years for myself in various partnerships I've been in, or places I've seen things go really right or wrong with clients when they've been in partnerships, or they've come in having just left a partnership. And I'm going to go through these, and these are just points to keep in mind. And some of the points apply if you're the senior partner, and some of the points apply if you're the junior partner. So I'm just going to roll through these things, and it's just something that you can kind of use as a little checklist if a partnership is something you're considering. Again, this is not legal advice, but these are things that you can discuss with your attorney. All right, so point number one, and why do most partnerships run into trouble? It's usually not because the two people don't like each other or don't get along. That has happened. I've seen cases where somebody was literally put into a partnership. They were introduced by their landlord or something, or the practice broker, and they bought the practice together, didn't know each other from a hole in the wall. Then they finally start working together, and after about 3 weeks, they're telling each other they hate each other's face, right? I've seen that before. That's very rare. And, not a good thing, obviously. But for the most part, people get along, and that's why they go into partnership. But where they go wrong, usually the upsets have to do with money, power, and responsibility, meaning there's something funky going on with the money, okay? Or someone's doing something that they shouldn't be doing or trying to grab power that really should be shared, okay? Or someone comes into the partnership saying they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they're really not doing it. So the first piece of advice I would give you if you're bringing on a partner is you always want to be fair, clean, and transparent. And you may think that this, of course, Jeff, that seems stupid or whatever, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do this. In all the partnerships that I'm in, if anybody wants access to any of the financials, they can have immediate access. Now, let's say we're in a business where I have a much more substantial portion of the business than they do, and I make substantially more money. Well, fine. Then if they know math, they should already know that. That shouldn't be something that I have to explain to them. They just do the percentages. Well, I've got 60% and they have 20. So if we're splitting $100, I'm getting 60 and they're getting $20. That's fair. That's according to how we set the partnership up. So I should have no concern or fear about them looking at any of the financials. I'm going to be completely transparent, right? If you're ever in a situation where you're worried about showing something to your partner that they should be able to know, then you might wonder, am I doing the right thing? But you want to be clean, you want to be fair, you want to be transparent. Treat your partner the way that you would want to be treated, right? If you and I'll get into buyouts and stuff a little bit later, but even if you're being bought out, how would you want to be handled when you were being bought out, right? That would be the first most important thing, because especially if you're the senior partner or the person running the business, you have a responsibility to do these things, be ethical, and do the right thing. Then obviously the second thing is make sure you know this person. So with an associate, this is great. You've worked with them for a while, so you know them and you get a general idea of how they work. If it's someone who comes along that you maybe knew from dental school or you used to work with, then maybe you at least know their skill and quality as a dentist. You can get a little bit of an update as to how they're doing. If it's somebody who just wants to buy into your practice, again, I'm not a huge fan of that if you don't know them very well. But if that's something that you do want to do, there might be certain things that you want to know about them to make sure that you would be comfortable bringing them in as a business partner. The third thing when you're setting up a partnership is you want to set expectations, what each of you are expected to handle, and that should be in writing. And there's a different hat here, okay? I've talked about hats before, right? Roles. So if I'm bringing in a business partner, that's an owner hat. But let's say this business partner is also going to be an associate doctor. Okay. Well, obviously, if I'm bringing on an associate doctor or, a junior doctor, they're going to know what it is they're supposed to do because they're a doctor. There's a doctor hat, right? Well, those are, and in most cases, people explain the doctor hat pretty well. And a lot of it they already know how to do because they're already trained to be a doctor. But, you show them how you want exams done in your practice and how you want certain things, procedures handled and things like this. But if you're bringing in a partner, you're bringing in somebody to wear part of the owner hat. So what part of the owner hat are they expected to wear? And that should be clearly outlined. Maybe you're bringing in somebody who's going to handle the finances. Well, then they should understand what does that mean and what are the expectations. And for me, I would put all of this in writing and have everybody agree to it. This is something you can go over with your attorney. This way, if they don't handle it, not that this is necessarily going to, help you break up the partnership, but it's at least something you can hold them accountable to. And you would do this for yourself as well. What are the expectations that you are going to handle? Because sometimes what happens, especially in 50-50 partnerships, say you have two doctors, they're in 50-50 partnership and they have an office manager. It's, you have both of them trying to handle the office manager, giving them different directives. And then the office manager feels like they're bouncing into walls because Dr. A tells him to do one thing and Dr. B tells him to do something else. So you want to have a clear role from the owner hat, who's handling what aspects of the owner hat, and you have to respect each other's space in that regard so that everybody can effectively wear their hat and not wear each other's hat, the same. All right? All right, now with a new associate, there's a couple different ways you could handle this. You could handle it real smooth from the get-go. Let's say you're bringing in an associate and you're really looking for a partner. And you meet somebody and you really like them. And you go, okay, this person's going to work out, or at least you're confident about it. And you've looked at some of their dentistry and you think they're a good dentist. Well, there's a couple different ways you can handle that. I've seen doctors. As a matter of fact, Dr. Winteregg, one of the founders of the company, when he brought his associate in, had the associate sign 3 agreements. There was an associate agreement, a buy-in agreement, and a buyout agreement. The fellow signed them all on day one. Now, obviously, the associate agreement had dictated or determined how the associate duties would be handled, and he outlined those and what the agreement would be. And then the buy-in agreement had a certain point at which it would trigger, where the associate would be eligible for buy-in. I think the period was 6 months, but they worked together for 6 months, and then they had a meeting and decided, yes, you know what? I'm comfortable with you buying in. All right. And then eventually when Dr. Renneregg said, you know what? I want to go. I'm going to end off and go. He ended up coming here. He was able to go to the associate and go, here's the buyout agreement. We can do it. Right. You don't necessarily have to go that far. But the reason I like that versus the conventional way this works is the associate had a very clear-cut idea of what he had to do to trigger the buy-in agreement and exactly how the buyout agreement would go in the event that Dr. Renneregg was going to leave. Where these usually go wrong is you have an associate and you go, okay, cool. I'd like to be a partner. And you go, yeah, sure. Let's work together for a while and see how it goes. Well, number one, what's a while? Maybe you even put a time limit on it. You say 6 months. But you don't really put specific metrics or what you expect to see in those 6 months in order to want to pursue letting this associate buy into your practice. You also should outline how much they're going to be buying in when they buy in. Maybe it could be 20% up to 49% or 50%, whatever that number might be, right? But the problem is then, so then 6 months go by, there's no metrics, let's say, on what triggers the buy-in. And then the associate feels like they're doing a good job and they're worthy of a buy-in, but they haven't met your expectations because you never clearly outlined them. That's when you start to see upsets, when there's no time associated with it or no milestones or markers as to what would allow for partnership to become a reality. When it's just this nebulous, yeah, sure, let's work together for a while. Okay. Which brings us to the next point, which is, in the case of doctors that we've had clients on our program that have structured their agreement like Dr. Renneregg did, do you want them to pay for their sweat equity or not? Now, I'm kind of ambivalent on this one. You have to decide what works best for you. So let's say you bring an associate in and you're doing $100 a month. Okay, so you bring the associate on and a year goes by and the associate does real well. Let's say they do 500. But let's say out of that 100 a month that you used to do, or 1.2 million a year you used to do, let's say you did about 700 of that. Well, now you did $1 million because that associate took all the small stuff off your schedule. So you did $1 million, the associate did 500, and let's say hygiene did 500. So your practice went from 1.2 million a year on your own to now with an associate, you did 2 million. Well, at 1.2 million, your practice is worth, let's say 70% of 1.2 million is 840,000. Well, now at 2 million, your practice is now worth 1.4 million. So the question is, are they going to pay, let's say they want to buy 50% of your practice or 49 or whatever. Are they going to pay for that sweat equity? Because, half of 700,000 or 840,000 is 420. Half of 1.4 million is $700,000, right? And again, I'm ambivalent on this, whether they're going to pay for sweat equity or not, up to you. I've seen clients who structure it where they don't pay for the sweat equity. I've seen clients who structure it where they do. I think in your main office, and I'm going to give you my opinion, in your main office, I would be comfortable charging somebody for sweat equity because this is sort of my baby. This is my main practice. But if I put an associate doctor in my second or third location, I might give them a little bit of a break. I buy this practice. It was doing 40, 50,000 a month. I put the associate in there and, let's say it was doing 50, which means the practice is worth 600 a year, or it's doing 600 a year. So it's worth whatever, 420 at 70%. And they get the place up to $1 million. Now it's worth, 700,000. I might give them a little bit of a break. I may not make them pay for all the sweat equity because I wasn't even there. They were the one building this location up. This is a personal decision you have to make, but it is a decision that you have to make. Otherwise, you'll go through whatever benchmarks, if this isn't agreed upon ahead of time, you go through whatever benchmarks you make to the point where what triggers a partnership conversation, then you have that partnership conversation and there's a huge chasm on price, and that causes an upset, and then you can't resolve it. You've been in these conversations before where you're so far apart, and you go, okay, well, we'll talk about it, we'll think about it, and you go back and forth and back and forth. Then the disagreement just festers, and eventually the person decides that it doesn't work out. And you took what was a really workable situation for you in the long term, and now it no longer works, right? So up to you, but I would definitely have the pricing or the pricing algorithm figured out ahead of time if partnership is going to be a discussion. Now, how might that look with an associate doctor? I've just brought the person in. So let's put you to work for a couple months that we can start talking about possibly doing a partnership. If you don't do the partnership agreement from the get-go, right? Or the buy-in agreement from the get-go. Then after a couple months, you sit down, you go, okay, good. So here's what would trigger a buy-in, and this is where we're going to figure out the price and blah, blah, blah. So if you're going to make the associate pay for all the sweat equity and they disagree with it, they can bring it up right then and there before they go doing it. You see? That's just me personally. It's part of keeping it clean, easy, and transparent. Then you end up with no disagreements later. The other thing that's important if you're considering partnership at some point in the future is making sure that your finances are completely on lock, meaning they're just properly handled. You know, I've given this example to clients before, but let's say you own your own building and you're giving yourself a real sweet deal on rent, right? Giving yourself a sweet deal. You're paying, I don't know, $6 or $7 less per square foot than you would pay if you were renting another space in your area. And then you execute. So then when you sell the practice or your portion of the practice, it's factoring in the profit based on this really low rent. But then you sell it and you go, okay, good, I'm going to jack the rent up to market prices in the area. Well, the associate, remember, you guys are splitting profit to one degree or another, is going to, what the heck's going on? So you want to make sure that all of these things are figured out before you start giving your potential partner a price. Which brings us to the next point is part of a partnership agreement has to do with how you're both going to be compensated. You know, you're going to have whatever salaries which represent what you do in the business, but whatever profits are left, you're going to split according to your level of partnership. So if I have a 50-50 partner, after we've met all of our expenses and we have, I don't know, $100,000 left over, we're supposed to split that 50-50. That's usually how that would work. So where I've seen this go wrong with clients is they have a partner and maybe they're a 50-50 partner and their personal compensation wasn't very well figured out. So think with this for a second. You have two dentists, they're partners. One dentist is wildly productive and the other one is not. Okay. The wildly productive dentist is producing $150,000 a month and the other fellow or girl is producing 50. So between the two doctors, they're producing 200, but 75% of this money is being produced by one of the doctors. But they both get a set salary of $10,000 a month. And then they split whatever's profit is left over at the end. So kind of do the math forward for a second. Dr. A produces 150, Dr. B produces 50. They each get a $10,000 a month paycheck. And then there's $50,000 left over at the end of the month. So they split that $50,000, $25,000 each. So Dr. A, for producing $150,000, got his $10,000 paycheck plus $25,000, $35,000. And Dr. B, who produced 50, gets his $10,000 paycheck and 25 in profit or $35,000. There's an inequity there unless Dr. B was on vacation for most of the month and that was the agreement that they had. So if you're going to bring in a dentist partner as a dentist, you want to make sure that you're both being compensated as doctors according to your level of productivity. There's a bazillion ways to figure that out. You can use a regular associate type compensation plan that you might use for an associate doctor or something to at least factor in your individual productivity, because in that example I just gave you a second ago, Dr. A is going to become very resentful of Dr. B eventually, and I've seen plenty of Dr. A's and B's in that scenario because Dr. B isn't really keeping up their end of the bargain. And, you know, that's why I say when you're bringing in a partner, make sure they're bringing something to the table. You can hire an associate doctor. You're not going to hire an owner. Okay. So if what they're bringing to the table is they're really awesome and productive and can do all this kind of stuff, well then, and you can do these other things, well then that tends to work out fine. But if it's just, you know, they're another dentist and they happen to have enough money to pay into your practice, but then you haven't got your compensation plan to factor in your production as a dentist, that's where you can get yourself into trouble. So that's important. The next thing that's important is, depending on your corporate structure, again, this is a discussion with your attorney. You're most likely set up in some form of a PLLC or an LLC, depending on where you practice. I'm not a huge fan of just basic S corporations, like an Inc. I prefer LLCs and PLLCs because you can use an operating agreement which dictates everything about how your business is done or run. Okay. Which to me is a lot easier to work with. That's just my own. This is something you can talk to your attorney about, but this is where you can, all the points of transparency I started the episode off with, these things can be listed in your operating agreement. You're going to be having a meeting on these dates. You're going to be publishing the financial information once a quarter. Everybody has access to the finances. All of this can be in your operating agreement, as well as the things that each of you are expected to do, or, who's the manager of the business. All of these things are not the office manager, different hat I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the corporate manager. All of that is outlined, and everybody agrees to it and understands before you actually do it. It also gets into, how the practice, if the practice was going to be sold, how that's going to go. If you sell it, are there, you probably heard the term drag along and tag along rights. Drag along rights are, say someone comes along and I'm the majority owner and someone says, "Hey, Jeff, we want to buy this practice," right? And they make me a really good offer. Let's say the practice is, 70% of last year's collections was, let's say it did $3 million. 70% of last year's collection is 2.1, but they're offering me a multiple, which I don't want to get into all of that, the whole multiple of whatever. Let's just skip it. It's a big corporation. They want to buy my office. And on paper, using the old valuation method, it'd be worth 2.1 million, but they're willing to offer me 5 million. And I really like the deal. Well, you want to have in your operating agreement whether you have drag along rights, meaning I'm the senior partner, so I can say, yes, we're selling, but that means I bring the minority partners with me as well, and they get compensated at the same rate according to their percentage. There's also tag along rights where if I want to sell any of my shares, they can also engage in that too. This would all be laid out in your operating agreement. The other thing that's really important that should be in your operating agreement, and most people don't think about in partnerships, is what happens if things don't work out. This is, again, where things go really wrong with partnerships and lawyers get involved and lawsuits start to happen. So let's say, when you're conceiving of a partnership, whether it's an associate who you've worked with for the last 6 months and you really like them and you think this is going to be great and eventually they're going to buy you out as you retire, or it's a friend of yours and you're going to start this second office together, whatever iteration of partnership it is that you are looking at, no one's ever thinking about what if one day you can't stand this person or you don't want to work with them anymore or something. No one's ever thinking of that. Okay. It just doesn't cross our mind. And maybe the reason why is we don't want to think negatively about it. We're very positive, right? We're starting a business or we're starting a new endeavor. Well, you should be thinking about that because there's always the chance that it's not going to work out. So you want an agreement upon what's going to happen, or you want an agreement as to what's going to happen if things don't work out. How do we dissolve this thing? How do we end this partnership in the most fair manner possible? This should be dictated before you actually start the partnership. I've done this in every partnership I've ever been in, right? And you want to make sure it is super clean and super fair for a number of different reasons. Again, I'm not giving you legal advice, but let's say the way that you've decided that the partnership is supposed to be split up is weighted very heavily. Let's say you're the majority partner, very heavily in your favor, and it really screws over the minority partner. Well, chances are once you start rolling with that, they can sue you. I mean, again, I'm not an attorney, but if it's unfair and not standard business practice and just egregious, it's probably not going to work out for you. So for me, I try to keep it as fair as possible. If somebody wants to sell their shares, here's the procedure. We get them evaluated by an agreed upon evaluator who's a licensed business evaluator or a CPA, and they give us a number, and I have first right of refusal to buy those shares. And if I don't want to buy them, they can handle it like this and blah, blah, blah. And it's done very clean and very fair. So anybody, any judge, any lawyer could look at this and go, oh, wow, that's pretty fair. You see? So then if it does come to the point where the partnership just is not working out for you, there's something you guys have in writing that you are both have agreed to do. It doesn't have to become this wacky, crazy thing where people are suing each other. Because again, if I were to look at the major trigger points where these partnerships go off the rails, is usually about money or power or disagreements on who's supposed to be doing what, or, contributions to the business. And then the dissolution of the partnership is where things become really ugly because there wasn't any agreed upon means of dissolution, or I picked the valuator and you disagree with the valuator I picked and you disagree with the value. You just don't want to get into that. So if you make it really clean from the get-go and we both agree on the business valuator and the business valuator gives us a number, well, what are we going to say? It becomes really simple. And I have to pay, and this is how I have to pay if I want to buy your shares, and this is the time period with which I can pay, and these are the things you agree to. It becomes really simple, folks. It becomes very, very easy, and it makes dissolving the partnership not so much of a nightmare at that point. But look, if you do things right from the get-go, when you start the partnership, the chances are you're going to end up not dissolving the partnership, and the partnership will end up working out. Anyway, so that's what I have. That's my weekly data dump of the week. I was just thinking about this, when we made our content outline. I'm like, I've never done anything on partnerships. And again, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I am an end user. I've been a partner. I am a partner. And I know a lot of clients who have been partners and dentists. And it's happening more and more. So it's worth knowing these things, at least to keep them on your radar, so that if you find yourself in this situation and you start a partnership, at least I would hope it gives you sort of the best chance of having a successful one that turns out the way you originally conceived it. Very few people go into a partnership hoping it's going to end up, burning itself to the ground. I hope not. They go in with the idea hoping it's going to work out. So that's all I have for you this week. I'll put the links to it, the two things I mentioned earlier on the episode webpage. Otherwise, if you want to know more about MGE, you can find us at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.